Chapter 2. George looked back down the garden at the path along which he'd come. He knew he should go back and get his parents, even if he had to admit to his dad that he'd climbed through the fence into the next door's garden. It would still be better than standing there all alone. He would just peek through the window to see if he could catch a glimpse of Freddie, and then he would go and get his dad. He edged closer to the beam of bright light coming from the empty house. It was a golden color, quite unlike the weak candlelight in his own house or the cold blue neon strips at school. Even though he was so scared his teeth had started to chatter, the light seemed to draw him forward until he was standing right by the window. He peered closer. Through the narrow space between the window frame and the blind, he could just see into the house. He could make out a kitchen, littered with mugs and old tea bags. A sudden movement caught his eye, and he squinted down at the kitchen floor, where he saw Freddie. His pig. He had his snout in a bowl and was slurping away, drinking his fill of some mysterious bright purple liquid. George's blood ran cold. It was a terrible trick. He just knew it. "Yikes!" he shouted. "It's poison!" He rapped sharply on the pane of the glass. "Don't drink it, Freddie!" he yelled. But Freddie, who was a greedy pig, ignored his master's voice and happily kept slurping the contents of the bowl. Without stopping to think, George flew through the door and into the kitchen, where he grabbed the bowl from under Freddie's snout and threw its contents into the sink. As the violet-colored liquid glurped down the drain, he heard a voice behind him. "Who," it said in a distinct but childish tones, "are you?" George whirled around. Standing behind him was a girl. She was wearing the most extraordinary costume, made of so many different colors and layers of flimsy fabric that it looked as though she rolled herself in butterfly wings. George splattered. She might look strange, this girl, with her long, tangled blonde hair and blue and green feather headdress, but she definitely wasn't scary. "Who," he replied, "do you think you are?" "I asked first," said the girl. "And anyway, this is my house. So I get to know who you are, but I don't have to say anything if I don't want to. I'm George." He stuck out his chin, and as he did always when he felt cross. "And that," he pointed to Freddie, "is my pig, and you've kidnapped him." "I haven't kidnapped your pig," said the girl hotly. "How stupid. What would I want a pig for? I'm a ballerina, and there aren't any pigs in the ballet." Ballet?" muttered George darkly. His parents had made him take dance classes when he was younger, and he'd never forgotten the horror. "Anyway," he retorted, "you're not old enough to be a ballerina. You're just a kid." "Actually, I'm the Corpse Day Ballet," said the girl snootily, "which shows how much you know." "Well, if you're so grown up, why were you trying to poison my pig?" demanded George. "That's not poison," said the girl scornfully. "That's grape soda." George, whose parents only ever gave him cloudy, pale, fresh-squeezed fruit juices, suddenly felt very silly for not realizing what the purple stuff was. "Well, this isn't really your house, is it?" he continued, determined to get the better of her somehow. "It belongs to an old man with a long beard that disappeared years ago." "This is my house," said the girl, her blue eyes flashing. "And I live here except when I'm dancing on stage." "Then where are your mom and dad?" demanded George. "I don't have any parents." The girl's pink lips stuck out in a pout. "I'm an orphan. I was found backstage wrapped up in a tutu. I've been adopted by the ballet." "That's why I'm such a talented dancer," she sniffed loudly. "Annie!" A man's voice rang through the house. The girl stood very still. "Annie!" There, they heard the voice again, coming closer. "Where are you, Annie?" "Who's that?" asked George suspiciously. That's, uh, that's... She suddenly became very interested in her ballet shoes. "Annie, there you are!" A tall man with messy dark hair and a thick, heavy framed glasses set at a crooked angle on his nose walked into the kitchen. "What have you been up to?" "Oh!" The girl flashed him a brilliant smile. "I've just been giving the pig a drink of grape soda." A look of annoyance crossed the man's face. "Annie," he said very patiently, "we've talked about this. There are times to make up stories, and there are times—" He trailed off as he caught sight of George standing in the corner, and, next to him, a pig with purple stains around his snout and mouth that made him look as though he were smiling. "Ah, a pig! In the kitchen! I see," he said slowly, taking in the scene. "Sorry, Annie. I thought you were making things up again. Well, hello." The man crossed the room to shake hands with George. Then he sort of patted the pig rather gingerly between the ears. "Hello." "Hi." He seemed unsure what to say next. "I'm George," said George hopefully, "and this is my pig, Freddie." "Your pig?" the man echoed. He turned back to Annie, who shrugged and gave him an "I told you so" look. "I live next door," George went on by the way of explanation, "but my pig escaped through the hole in a fence, so I had to come and get him." "Of course," the man smiled. "I was wondering how you got into the kitchen. My name is Eric. I'm Annie's dad." He pointed to the blonde girl. "Annie's dad?" said George slyly, smiling at the girl. She stuck her nose up in the air and refused to meet his eye. "We're your new neighbors," said Eric, gesturing around the kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper, moldy old tea bags, dripping faucets, and torn linoleum. "It's a bit of a mess. We haven't been here long. That's why we haven't met before." Eric ruffled his dark hair and frowned. "Would you like something to drink? I gather Annie's already given your pig something." "I'd love some grape soda," said George quickly. "None left," said Annie, shaking her head. George's face fell. It seemed very bad luck that even Freddie the pig should get to go have nice drinks when he hadn't. Eric opened a few cupboards in the kitchen, but they were all empty. He shrugged apologetically. "Glass of water?" he offered, pointing to the faucet. George nodded. He wasn't in a hurry to get home for his supper. Usually he went to play with other kids. He went back to his own mom and dad feeling depressed by how peculiar they were. But this house seemed so odd that George felt quite cheerful. Finally, he had found some people who were even odder than his own family. But just as he was thinking these happy thoughts, Eric went and spoiled it for him. "It's pretty dark," he said, peering out of the window. "Do your parents know you're here, George?" He picked up a telephone handset from the kitchen counter. "Let's give them a call so they don't worry about you." Said George awkwardly. "What's the number?" asked Eric, looking at him over the top of his glasses. "Or are they easier to reach on a cell phone?" They, George could see no way out. "They don't have any phone," he said in a rush. "Why not?" said Annie, her blue eyes very round at the thought of not owning even a cell phone. George squirmed a bit. Both Annie and Eric were looking at him curiously, so he felt he had to explain. "They think technology is taking over the world," he said very quickly, "and that we should try and live without it. They think that people, because of science and its discoveries, are polluting the planet with modern inventions." "Really?" Eric's eyes sparkled behind his heavy glasses. "How very interesting." At that moment, the phone in his hand burst into a tinkling song. "Can I get it? Can I get it? Please, please, please!" said Annie, grabbing for the phone from him. "Mom!" And with a shriek of joy and a flounce of brightly colored costume, she shot out of the kitchen. Phone collapsed to her ear. "Guess what, Mom?" Her shrill rang out as she pattered along the hall corridor. A strange boy came over. George went bright red with embarrassment. And he has a pig! Annie's voice carried perfectly back to the kitchen. Eric peered at George gently and gently eased the kitchen door closed with his foot. And he's never had grape soda, with flaunting tones could still be heard through the shut door. Eric turned on the faucet to get George a glass of water. And his parents don't even have a phone. Annie was fainter now, but they could still make out each painful word. Eric flicked on the radio and some music started playing. So, George, he said loudly, where were we? I don't know, whispered George, who could barely be heard in the din Eric had created in the kitchen to block out Annie's telephone conversation. Eric threw him a sympathetic glance. Let me show you something fun, he shouted, producing a plastic ruler from his pocket. He brandished it in front of George's nose. Do you know what this is? He asked at top volume. A ruler? Said George. The answer seemed a bit too obvious. That's right, cried Eric, who was now rubbing the ruler against his hair. Watch. He held the ruler near the thin stream of water running from the faucet. As he did so, the stream of water bent in the air and flowed at an angle rather than straight down. Eric took the ruler away from the water and it ran down normally again. He gave the ruler to George, who grabbed it. His hair and put close to the stream of water. The same thing happened. Is this magic? Yelled George with a sudden excitement, completely distracted from Annie's rudeness. Are you a wizard? Nope, said Eric, putting the ruler back into his pocket as the water ran down in a long straight line once more. He turned off the faucet and switched off the radio. It was quiet now in the kitchen, and Annie could no longer be heard in the distance. That's science, George, said Eric, his whole face shining. Science. The ruler steals electric charge from your hair when you rub the ruler through it. We can't see the electric charges, but the stream of water can feel them. Gosh, that's amazing, breathed George. It is, Eric agreed. Since science is wonderful and fascinating subject that helps us understand the world around us and all is marvels. Are you a scientist? Asked George. He suddenly felt very confused. I am. Yes, replied Eric. Then how can that, George pointed out the faucet, be science when science is also killing the planet and everything on it? I don't understand. Ah, clever boy, said Eric with a flourish. You've gotten right into the heart of the matter. I will answer your question, but to do so, first I need to tell you a bit about science itself. Science is a big word. It means explaining the world around us using our senses, our intelligence, and our powers of observation. Are you sure? Said George doubtfully. Very sure, said Eric. There are many different types of natural science, and they have many different uses. The one I work with is all about how and the why. How did it all begin? The universe, the solar system, our planet, life on Earth. What was there before it began? Where did it all come from? And how does it all work? And why? This is physics, George. Exciting, brilliant, and fascinating physics. But that's really interesting, exclaimed George. Eric was talking about all the questions he presented his parents with, the ones they could never answer. He tried asking these big questions at school, but the answer he got most often is that he'd find out in class that following year. That wasn't really the answer he was after. Should I go on? Eric asked him, his eyebrows raised. George was about to say, "Oh, yes, please," when Freddie, who had been quiet and docile up till then, seemed to pick up on his excitement. He lumbered upright and, with a surprising spurt of speed, he dashed forward, ears flattered, hoofs flying, toward the door. "No!" cried Eric, throwing himself after the pig. So he barged through the kitchen door. "Stop!" shouted George, rushing into the next room behind them. "Oink, oink, 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 oink," squealed Freddie, who was obviously enjoying his day out enormously.